All right, everybody. Welcome back to week 2 of JavaScript Code Your First Game. So, like I said, we have a lot to cover for this course. It's a lot of foundational work, so a lot of strong skills that you're going to need before we can advance into the harder topics and the images and animations and things like that. So, let's see. So we're going to go over, once again, we're just going to touch on what JavaScript is, why learn it. We're going to go over variables and constants and data types. We're going to go over some basic operators, so things like how you do calculations, basic math, things like that. And then we're going to go over the Math.random and the Math.floor methods, what those are and what that does. And then we're going to touch on the console.log statement and talk about string concatenation. So first thing, what is JavaScript and why use it? So again, JavaScript allows the user to interact with your web page. So without JavaScript, if you wrote a web page that was in HTML and CSS, it's just static. And what I mean by that is it's really just sitting there for you to view. It's read only. You can't really do anything with it. You can't really interact with it to make something happen on the web page. So for example, the final project, you select a button and then the images flip around. That's all JavaScript. Without JavaScript, it would just be 3 images that are in the same spot for you to just look at. And yeah, so JavaScript can be used to react to user interactions like mouse clicks, pointer movements, and the keyboard. Okay, and here we go. So an example of that is an image. And in this example, it's an image of a basketball. So of course, I know a lot of you have HTML and CSS experience. So as you may know, it's easy to just embed an image of a basketball in your web page, right? Now with JavaScript, what JavaScript can do is actually make that ball bounce and make it move like you see here off to the right. This is a little more complex, but that's what we're going to be learning eventually in this course is something similar. As you guys saw in the final project, we're going to be flipping images around after pressing a button, making things move on the web page to make it a little more exciting and a little more lively. So let's jump right in. Does anybody have any questions so far? Is that pretty clear on what JavaScript is, why use it? Thumbs up. All right. So let's jump right into variables. So I always tell people, think of variables like boxes, like storage. So whenever, for example, whenever I'm moving, I'll stack a ton of boxes. I'll go into my room and put objects in those boxes. And that's basically what variables do. So in terms of computer science and software development, the variable is just a box. And what we're storing in that box is data. And we'll go over the data types and what kind of data that you can store in variables. So there's 3 different ways you can actually, well, 2 different ways that you can declare a variable. One of them is with the var keyword. Now that works, but that is not recommended. And I'll go over why in just in a few seconds here. But as you can see, with the code snippet here, you write var, then you're going to write the name of the variable, and then you're going to set it equal to a data piece. So whether that's a number, a string, or a Boolean, which we'll go over in the next slides. And then you also have the let keyword. Now that is recommended. That is more of the new school JavaScript. So let is what you're going to want to use. As you can see in the code snippets, you just type let, your variable name, and then you're going to set it equal to a piece of data. Another thing I wanted to go over is variable declaration. When you're declaring variables, you're going to want to make sure you use camel casing. And basically what camel casing is, has anybody heard of camel casing?
Like, I think I heard of it before. Like sometimes, like you, in the middle of a sentence or like a word, like sentence capital, like, or every second or like every second or like I don't know, like every other word is like capitalized and the other words are lowercase. Like, that's how I heard of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's correct. So if you look here, how I name these variables, so favorite superhero. So what camel casing is you start the name of the variable with a lowercase, and then each word, each separate word is going to be capitalized. So we have two words here. We have favorite and superhero. Now the F in favorite is lowercase, and then superhero is capitalized S. And if you notice, there's no spaces. You don't want to put any spaces in your variable name. They have to be all together, cohesive as one. And of course, don't forget the semicolon at the end of each statement. It's just like CSS. So what Paul's talking about, for those of you, if you remember, when you're writing CSS, after each statement, say if you were doing background color or height and width or things like that, you always had to put a semicolon after each statement. And that's the same thing that we're doing here with JavaScript. So after every variable declaration, always remember that semicolon. If you run your program and you're getting an error, you don't know what it is, the first thing I always check for is, okay, did I put a semicolon where I was supposed to? And oh yeah, and I was going to tell you guys why. So var, it works to this day, but it's not recommended. Like I said, it's more of a historical reason. So when JavaScript first came out, they used var. Let didn't exist yet. So people just went along using var, but then they started finding um, some bad things that var was letting you do. And one of those is it allowed you to reassign a variable declaration, which is not good. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I were to just go into my replit, my repls, and we'll go into OrangeNote, and I'll just create a new REPL here, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then I'll just call this playground. We'll just head into our script.js file. What I mean by that is if I were to write var and say first name, and then I set it equal to my name, Trinidad, I could actually go in here, write var, and then redeclare that. And let's say maybe I don't want my first name to be Trinidad. Let's make it Trin. And then if I wanted to, print this out to the console, I'll show you this later. I would type in first name, and now it's kind of it's a little ambiguous. It's uncertain as to what's going to print out to the console. Is it going to be Trinidad or is it going to be Trin? And in this case, it's Trin. But what if I was expecting Trinidad, right? So redeclaring variables with the same name is no good. And that's why we want to avoid using var. With let won't let that happen. No pun intended. But yeah, so we don't want to use var. Let's go back here. All right, so in JavaScript, there's 3 different data types, one of them being number, the other one being string, and the last one being Boolean. Now, number is pretty straightforward. That's just numbers. So whole numbers or decimal numbers, 5, 20, 5.5, 1,223.1234566. Those are all numbers. Now strings, strings are just a collection of characters. And when I think of strings, I always think of, like if you ever go to birthday parties or something like that, they usually have streamers up. Sometimes like this one here, and there's letters on each string. That's what I think of when I see a string. So it's just a collection of letters, um, you know, um, that are formed to create a word. So in this example here, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Black Widow, these are all strings. And in JavaScript, they're represented with double quotes. They're enclosed in double quotes. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is in JavaScript, you can use double quotes or single quotes. And I know some people ask, well, which one should I choose? And the answer is it's preference. Whatever you like to use the best, you can use it. The one thing that I ask is just make sure that you're consistent. So if you're going to use double quotes, try not to use single quotes, right? Try to make it all the same. And you can't use both to enclose one word. So if you use a double quote on this side and a single quote on the other side, JavaScript's not going to like it, and it's going to throw you an error. Now let's go over Booleans. So with Booleans, there's only 2 values possible. So the Boolean data types, they either result to true or false. And it's that simple. So if you take a look at this code snippet here, we're going to use the let keyword to declare a variable. We're using camel case to call it is less than. And then we're going to set that equal to 5 is less than 6. Now, of course, we all know that that is true. 5 is less than 6. So if I were to print that to the console, it's just going to print true. Anybody have any questions so far? Yeah, Annabelle?
Where should you use or add the data types?
Oh, very good question. So for JavaScript, it actually uses what's called type inference. And what that means is JavaScript is smart. It recognizes what kind of data type it is depending on what you set it equal to. So if I were to, for example, if I were to write let favorite superhero. So let's go back to right here. So I wrote favorite superhero is equal to Spider-Man, and I enclose that in double quotes. So what JavaScript does is it recognizes that I enclose this in double quotes, and it automatically recognizes it as a string. Now, what you'll notice as you progress in your programming career and you start coding in many different languages, there's some languages where you actually have to declare the data type explicitly. So you have to, so C and C++, you have to actually write string or int for integer or double for decimal. So a double is, 55.55, things like that. So with JavaScript, we don't have to worry about it. JavaScript does that for us. So it's kind of nice. It really depends on what environment you're using. It's kind of like, if you go over to a friend's house or you have a slumber party, you have to follow their rules, right? They have their house rules that you got to follow. So depending on your environment that you're coding in, some environments may be different. Some may allow you to do things that others can't, right? And that was a good example is a capital letter may work in one environment, whereas in Replit, it doesn't. So the one thing that I always tell people to follow is when you name your variables, just make sure that it's named the same across your entire program. So if you declared it, so down here, how I declared it is less than. If you declared it that way with the I and is lowercase, make sure you use it like that everywhere else. It's good to be consistent. It's a good practice. All right, and let's move forward. All right, so let's go over constants. It's similar to a variable, but it's not. So the difference between a constant and what a constant is it's used to store values that will not change in the program. So once declared, the constant values cannot be reassigned. And you can use or you can declare constants using the const keyword, as you can see here. It's just const, const. And then I'm using the same camel casing naming convention. And then you're going to set it equal to whatever you want to set it equal to. Now, with constants, when you go deeper into your coding career, you're going to see that a lot of people use uppercase, all uppercase when they're using constants. I know I used uppercase a lot when I coded in C and C++. And really the difference between the constants up here that I declared and the ones down here is when you're using all uppercase, that means that the value of the constant is known prior to executing your program. So what I wrote up here, I had hours in a day and my birthday month. So everybody knows how many hours are in a day. So this should actually be all uppercase, right? Because it's known prior to program execution. And I know my birthday month, right? So that should also be in all uppercase. And that's what I did down here. So now let's talk about naming convention again. So when you're writing in uppercase, as you can see, I used these underscores here. So when you're writing uppercase, declaring uppercase constants, you want to use underscores to separate each word. And then of course, if the constant value is not known until the program runs and it's not expected to change after the initial assignment, then just use the regular naming convention of camel case that we went over. That makes sense to everybody? All right, let's move forward. So let's go over some basic operators. These are pretty simple. So we have addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Now, when you want to do mathematical calculations, for addition, that's just going to be the plus sign. Subtraction is the hyphen sign, which I think shares the same key as the underscore. And then multiplication, as you saw from last week's demo, that's going to be, if you hold on to shift and press the number 8 key, that's going to print out the star icon, and that's going to stand for multiplication. And I think Grace brought up a good question last week about how it looked different on her screen than mine. That's just Windows and Mac. They're a little different in how they display their keywords. So when I'm coding and I'm using multiplication, if it looks a little different, don't worry. That's just the operating system's way of displaying letters on the screen. And let's go over division and modulus. So the division is just the /, which I think shares the same key as the question mark. So that's what you're going to use for division. And then the one that is the most unclear in basic operators is modulus. Has anybody ever heard of modulus? No? So modulus uses the percent sign. And basically what modulus is when you're doing, if you ever do a division problem, as you know, sometimes you get a remainder and sometimes you don't, right? So you'll get 0 for a remainder or 1, whatever it is. So in this example here, we did 25 divided by 6. And as you can see, we got a remainder of 1. And what mod does is it'll perform a division calculation, and then it'll print out a 0 if there is no remainder and a 1 if there is. So in this example right here that I used, I just set modulus equal to 5 modulus 5. And 5 divided by 5 is 1 with no remainder. So the value of this is actually 0. So that's the one that's the hardest to understand. So I wanted to go over that. And then everything else, we have the plus sign that we're using here. So 5 plus 4, 5 minus 1, 5 multiplied by 3, and 5 divided by 5. Okay, so let's go over Math.floor and Math.random. So I'll tell you that this is very important. You're going to need this to do the final project. So for Math.random, usually there's a misunderstanding with Math.random and what it does. Some people think that it generates a random number, a random whole number, whatever it may be. But that's not true. So what Math.random does is it creates a random number, but that number is between 0.0 and 1.0. So for example, down here in the code snippet, I declare a variable and I just name it random number. And then I'm going to set it equal to math.random. So math is a class that's in JavaScript, and random is a method that we're accessing from that class to run in our program. And then we're going to print it to the console. So what's happening here is I don't know what this number is going to be until I execute the program. It's literally just a random number between that interval. So in this example, if I run it, I actually got 0.9758125 and so on. So what if we didn't want a number between 0.0 and 1.0? What if we wanted a random whole number? So first, what you want to do is you want to decide, okay, well, what do you want the interval to be? Do you want a random number between 1 and 5, 1 and 10, between 1 and 100? And then what you want to do is you want to use a math method called floor. And that's just written as math.floor. And what's going to happen is it's going to take a decimal number and it's going to print the whole number value of it. In a sense, it's going to floor it. So for example, if I were given the number 1.5 and I used math.floor, that's going to output the number 1. Now, if I had 20.9 and I floored that, that's going to output 20. So sometimes there's a little confusion with Math.floor because if you guys are familiar with rounding, as you may know, if the decimal is 0.5 or higher, then you round up, right? So with 1.5 or 1.6, you would think, okay, well, it's probably going to round it up to 2, but that's not the case. So 1.5, 20.9. This is a good example of what I was talking about. If you floor 20.9, it's going to be 20. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody have any questions on that? All right. You guys are smart. Let's see. And let's move forward. Okay, so let's go over the console.log because you guys have been seeing it so much with the demo and what I've been showing you throughout the code. And it's actually very simple. So all console.log does, it's a JavaScript statement. And what it does is it prints output to the console. So This is very good for debugging your programs. As you'll learn as you progress in your coding career, console.log is very, very handy. You can a lot of coders use it to check to make sure that expected values are actually being stored where they're supposed to, if that makes sense. So if I wanted to make sure that the variable that I declared down here, random, if I wanted to make sure that that variable was actually getting a value, then I could print it to the console. And that's exactly what I did here. So declaring the random number variable using the let keyword. And then I'm using Math.floor and Math.random to generate a random number. And then I'm just printing it to the console. And it's just console.log. That's how you want to write it. And then you're going to have parentheses, and then you're going to put the name of the variable that you want to print. And the last thing I wanted to go over is string concatenation. This is also important. You're going to need this for the first coding assignment. And this is pretty simple as well. All string concatenation does. Concatenation is just a fancy term for combine. And so that's what it does. It's combining data. So for example, let's say we wanted to combine a string with a random number. That could be done using the following code. So same thing I did here is I declared a variable, and this variable is storing a random number. And what I want to do is I want to print it to the console, but I want to print and tell the console what this is. Or for anybody that may be debugging my program, or myself for clarification. So what I want to do here is in the console.log statement, you're gonna declare a string. And again, how do you declare a string with the strings? When you declare a string, or how to tell that it's a string, remember it's the double quotes. So you're going to want to enclose it in double quotes. And again, it's really your choice if you want to use double quotes or single quotes. It's just whatever one you choose, just make sure that you're consistent and you use that throughout the entire program. So after I declare the string and I enclose it in double quotes, to concatenate, so to add the random number to it, I'm going to use the plus sign as shown here. So the plus sign is used after the string, and then I just add the name of my variable, which is random, right after the plus sign. Now, when you print this to the console, as you can see down here, I'm going to get random number, and then the random number that's generated from the random method. And that's string concatenation. So does anybody have any questions on string concatenation, Annabelle?
Is this something like the math one and that string? Where should you like use that number? Like to size like a picture or something, or where should you use it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So Math.random is very useful for accessing random elements in an array. We haven't gone over arrays yet. I think that might be next week, if I'm not mistaken, that we'll go over arrays. But the way where it helps with this final project is you're going to store a lot of images in what's called an array, which is just almost like a box, like a variable, but it's filled with multiple different objects, in this case, multiple different images. And you can actually access specific images in that array. But if you want to make it random, so if somebody blindfolds you and you're picking a number out of a jar, that's kind of where random number would come into play. So you would use that number and you would implement it with the array, and I'll show you how to do that next week, to generate or to print out a random image. So that is one case that Math.random comes in handy. And see, there's many different ways you can use the Math.random or random numbers. You can get very, very creative with it. Kind of like what I showed in the demo from last week is every time you click on that square, it's generating a random color. I don't know what color comes next after I click on it, and that's because of the Math.random method. So I took a hold of the RGB scale and I generated random values between 1 and 255 to get those colors. And say, for example, if you ever wanted to create a game one day, there's a lot of games out there where you roll dice. You know, if you ever played, I think like Monopoly might use dice. If I'm correct, don't take my word for that. But there's a lot of board games that use dice. Now, if you wanted to create a dice game, when you roll a dice, it's all random. You don't know what number you're going to get. All you know is that number is going to be between 1 and 6. Now you can create a dice game and guess what you're going to be using to make it random. Math.random. So that's a way, those are just a few ways that Math.random can be used. It's very useful, and it's used in the final project as well, right? Because I don't know where that mole is going to pop up. It's all randomized. So actually, I think that concludes the slides. So I'm going to open up my Replit. And I'm going to head into my JavaScript file. Remember, that's script.js. And let's say I just wanted to do some simple calculations, mathematical calculations, and then just print it to the console. But I wanted those numbers to be random. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to want to declare a variable. And to do that, and remember,
there's the other one, let.
Yep, exactly. So we're going to use the let keyword. That's for the new school JavaScript. That's what you're going to want to use now. So var is not recommended. So we're going to use let, and then let's just do a simple addition calculation preference. But let is more preferable among most programmers and software developers. And the reason why is for that reassignment that I showed you. You shouldn't be able to reassign variables with the same name. And that's what let protects you from. So things like that. So var still works. If you can use var if you want to, but I have to tell you that the var it's prone to vulnerabilities, like the one that I showed you today. So let is probably the better choice, but yeah, var still works. So let's go ahead and move forward. So I'm just going to name this first number, because if I'm going to do a simple summation of two numbers, then I'm going to need one number and then another number. And then I'm going to set this equal to a random number. Now, this is where it gets a little complicated. So you're going to want to write math.random. And then don't forget the quotation marks like this. Or I'm sorry, not the quotation marks, the parentheses, the enclosed parentheses. And then here's a little trick. So then you want to decide, okay, what do you want that number to be between? If you want it to be between 100, for example, then you're going to want to multiply it by 100. Now, what you're going to want to do is you want to floor that value, because remember, it's going to produce a decimal value. And if you guys remember, let's see, Grace or Greg, do you remember how to floor the random number, what we use?
What?
If we wanted to, so this math.random is going to generate a random decimal number. Now, if I wanted to turn that into a whole number, do you remember what method we use?
I forgot. I was typing that first number Math.random.
Okay, yeah, no problem, no problem. So what we're going to use is Math.floor. And what we want to do is we want to add that at the beginning. So Math.floor, just like that. And then that's going to make it a random whole number. Now, another little trick is you can actually get the number 0 from here. Now, to prevent yourself from getting the number 0, all you want to do is add 1 to the end of that. And then that's going to generate a number between 1 and 100 without 0. So I'm just going to copy that code, and then I'm going to paste it right below. And then I'm going to name this variable second number, like that. So now I should be getting 2 different numbers at random. I don't know what they're going to be. And now we want to store the sum or the results of these numbers into another variable. So let's go ahead and create another variable and call it sum. And what we want to do now is we want to set this sum equal to whatever first number plus second number is. Now to do that, we can use the names of these variables and set it equal to sum, like this. So I'll do first number plus second number, semicolon. And now I'm going to want to print this to the console. And so console.log. And then what I'm going to want to store in there is the name
Is there a
of,
space after the dot?
no space. This is all together. And if I wanted to print the sum to the console, all I'm going to do is put the name of the variable, which we called sum, and close that, and then the semicolon. So now I'm going to want to tell the console what this is. So I'm going to use string concatenation. And to do that, I like to use double quotes. If you want to use single quote, that's fine. It's really up to you. And then I'm just gonna put sum of 2 random numbers, something like that. And then I'm gonna enclose it in double quotes. And then to actually do the string concatenation, I'm gonna add a plus sign, just like that. So what I'm expecting to get out of the console is sum of 2 random numbers and then whatever number generates here. Now, if I click run, that's what I get. Sum of 2 random numbers, 108. Now this looks a little unorganized and a little scrambled. So I'm gonna wanna make this look a little better. So to do that, I'm gonna add a colon here and then a space. That way the 108 is not together with the random numbers. So let's run this again. And there we go. Sum of 2 random numbers, 94. And I can keep running it and get different numbers every time, random numbers, 49, 110, 52, 68, 81. It's going to be random every time. So I just wanted to show you guys that really quick because you're going to need to know this for the coding assignment. So I know we're a little over time, but I have office hours from 6 to 6:30. So I'm just going to go ahead and go over it. But that concludes the live class session. So you guys are more than welcome to leave. If you do want to see a quick overview of the coding assignment, go ahead and stay, and I'm going to go over that and make sure it's clarified and that you guys understand it. So let's head over to the classwork, and then let's head over to coding assignments here. So We got the coding assignment 1. So I'm going to select that. And let's open up the prompt. So the coding assignment 1 and all of the other coding assignments, they're each worth 50 points. And they're due the same day and time as the quizzes. So 11:59 the day before class. So that would be 11:59 next Thursday. So the instructions for this assignment, you're basically going to be practicing or putting what you learned today into practice. So you're going to be using variables, constants, data types, basic math operators, plus, minus, multiply, divide. And then you're going to be using Math.random and Math.floor to generate and output 3 random numbers to the console. Now, each random number must be within the following range here. So the first one should be between 1 and 10 inclusive. And what I mean by inclusive is if I were to generate a random number, it should include 1 and 10. So I should get 1 and 10 as a random number in that interval. The second number should be between 1 and 5 inclusive. And the third random number should be between 1 and 3 inclusive. And once you have those 3 random numbers generated, and remember, you can debug by printing them to the console. So once you verify that they're printing to the console, then I'm going to want you to utilize your basic operators and do some simple calculations. So you're going to want to find the sum of all 3, the difference of the first 2, the product of all 3, and then the quotient of the first 2. And I also included a rubric. So use this rubric here to guide you. And this is how it's going to be graded based on the rubric. So make sure you take a look at this. So 20 points. I'm going to give you 20 points if you generate 3 random numbers successfully and print them to the console. 10 points to make sure that each number is stored in a separate variable using the let keyword. And remember, we went over that in the demo. So the first number and the second number I stored separately in their own variable. And then the sum, difference, product, and the quotient are all calculated correctly and printed to the console. You're going to get 10 points for that. You're going to want to make sure each number is stored in a separate variable using the keyword let. I think I might have repeated myself there. Let's see. And then each calculation is stored in its own variable using the const keyword. So what I mean by that is for this assignment, for the calculations, so for here sum, I'm going to want you to use const instead, just to get some practice using the const keyword. So you're going to use let for the random numbers that you generate, and then const for the calculations, like the sum, the product, the difference, calculations like that. And then I'm going to check to make sure that the variables are using the proper naming convention. So the camel case that we talked about. And again, that is where it starts with the lowercase, and then each word is capitalized and they're combined, so no spaces. And then 4 points if the random number actually falls in the specified intervals. So 1 and 10, 1 through 5, and 1 through 3. And then proper titles. I'm gonna give you 2 points to if proper titles are printed to the console before each calculation. And basically what I mean by that is, see what I did here? I put sum of 2 random numbers. And what that does is it tells me what this number represents. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you use string concatenation to tell me, what number is that? Is that the sum? Is that the difference of the first 2 numbers, right? So, what is it? And then lastly, this is more so, I guess, cosmetics, just making sure that it looks nice in the console. So the random numbers, if they're evenly spaced apart, I'll give you 2 points for that. And actually, and I showed you an example. I accidentally did it, right? So at first, I believe my code looked like this, how it was all together. So when you print the random numbers, you're going to want to make sure they're not together like that, that they're evenly spaced apart so you can easily read them. And lastly, I'm going to give you extra credit for this. So using console.log and below all of your calculations, please tell me what kind of theme you plan on using for your final project. So you can do that by just using console.log like this. So console.log, and then you're just going to want to put in a string like I plan on using, Disney, something like that. And it's just going to be right below all of your calculations. And I'll give you an extra 5 points if you do that. And now for the submission, it says here, submit links to your web page and your Replit code. So that's important. I need to show you how to do that in Replit, which is actually pretty simple. So there's 2 links you're going to want to submit for your assignment. So the first one you're going to want to submit is this one here. And what this link does is it's going to give me a link to your web page. So if you were to have, if you had like a picture on your web page or something like that, or letters, or this would actually this would link to your web page, and I'd be able to see what you built. And then the other link you're going to want to give is this one here at the address bar here at the top. So you're just going to want to copy this and then submit it for the assignment. And what this does is this gives me a link to your code. That way I can actually see, your code and what you wrote. And, of course, this assignment is console. We're not doing anything on the web page yet. So this isn't actually going to show anything, but I just want to get you guys some practice on how we're going to be submitting the next coding assignments. So you're going to be submitting this. So this one here, and then this link up here, that's what you're going to submit. And then I also included a snapshot of the expected output. So this is what, this is the expected output. So this is what you're going to want your code or your console output to look like. So I have my random numbers here. I use string concatenation to clearly identify what the numbers represent. And then I spaced them apart evenly using commas. You don't have to use commas if you don't want to. It just makes it easier to read. So in this run, or in this program execution, 8, 5, and 1 were my random numbers. And then I have my sum, my difference of the first 2, the product, and then the quotient of the first 2. So you add those all up, that equals 14. The difference is 3, the product is 40. The quotient of the first 2 is 1.6. And I'll be looking at the output as well to make sure the calculations are correct. So like, does 8 plus 5 plus 1 actually equal 14, and so forth. But that's the coding assignment. So it's just going to utilize, foundational JavaScript that we learned today. So does anybody have any questions on the coding assignment?